Can Trump get the country back on track by its 250th birthday? Blaze News, The Mandate, starts right now. Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jill Savage, joined as always by Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson.
Great one today. Good one today.
It is. And on Fridays, we like to go through and reverse engineer what we had the founders envision. And we actually want to be crazy and actually apply that to modern times. But Matt, things aren't always great in this country, but there still is a lot to celebrate.
Yes, and the 250th anniversary of really the country's founding, we talk about what that means in this interview, is coming up this year, 2026, and this next year. The Trump administration has already made this a priority. So I thought, who better to bring in than Charles Kesler, who was one of my professors back in the day and is still a professor at Claremont McKenna College, a distinguished professor with an endowed chair there. He is a Harvard man. He went to Harvard graduate and Harvard undergrad, but we don't hold that against him. He's one of the only good ones who came out of there. William F. Buckley took him under his wing a long time ago. He wrote for National Review when he was, just coming out of college. Alexander Solzhenitsyn gave the address at Harvard the year he graduated, and basically gave an incredible speech about the decline of the Western world. So Charles is one of the unique figures in American conservatism today who has stood the test of time, is very smart, and has done a lot of cool stuff. Like the Claremont Review of Books is probably the most high-profile intellectual magazine in the country. It's quarterly. It's this big, beautiful volume with, classy black and white images and book reviews of amazing stuff. And Charles has really curated that for decades now, and just kind of put a bunch of beautiful things together and made a really beautiful, intelligent thing. He's also a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, where he was there from the beginning of the Claremont Institute fellowships, and he still teaches in that program. And I'm privileged to teach with him now there. So he was the perfect person to talk to about what this anniversary of America means and what the obstacles to it are, and what we should do for it.
I love it because you always used to say, back when I was smart and read books. Well, at Claremont,
Yes.
They have to read the books all the time. We'll have the interview with the Claremont Review of Books editor, Charles Kesler, coming up. Well, I used to think that I knew what I was buying at the grocery store until you find out that over 400 billion pounds of meat were imported to the U.S. just last year. And a lot of it can still be labeled like it's right here from America. That's when you have to start thinking like, wait, what are we actually eating? The product of the United States, that label can still be there, even if the meat wasn't raised here. So I found goodranchers.com and everything has changed. Their meat is 100% American. You know that it's born, raised, and harvested right here on local family farms, and it's delivered right to your door, and the quality is unmatched. I'm a subscriber myself, and it is worth it. You get $25 off every box, free shipping, plus they give you a free gift in every order for life. And what's better than a gift of bacon or seed oil-free chicken nuggets? You can also choose between the Wagyu burgers, but you can even swap the gift for something new each and every month. So if you're worried about signing up for a subscription, you really shouldn't be, because you can pause it, delay it, cancel it anytime. If you're going on vacation, no big deal. There's no stress, no lock-in. It's actually all pretty flexible. Thousands of people have already made the switch, and the reviews are amazing. So head over to goodranchers.com and see what everybody's talking about. Use my code Jill. You'll get $40 off plus free meat for life with your subscription. goodranchers.com. Welcome to the table.
Well, in this episode of The Mandate, every Friday, we sort of had Founders Friday around here, and we do a deeper dive into things of import for the sake of, your edification and the Republic. And this week, it's great to have one of my professors from back when I was much smarter. Every time you do TV, you get a little dumber. You lose a little bit of brain cell. So Charles, it's great to have you here today.
Matt, it's good to see you. You look tanned, rested, ready. So the blaze must be a healthy fire that you're drawing near to here.
Well, what I like to say that My Ozempic is the Texas summer and sun. Because if you exercise in it, you will in fact lose weight with no drugs whatsoever. It does the trick, sort of purgatory, very Catholic. But
Very
today,
good. Yeah.
Today, our subject is, I think, very important, and I thought who better to have on the show to discuss it. And it's really already begun. I mean, the Trump administration has already announced the beginning of the celebration of the 250th anniversary of America. And I think, we don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. It's an important priority of the Trump administration and the mandate of the people they received. This is what they're doing with it. There's many people in the administration, including Vince Haley, who's in charge of the Domestic Policy Council, and the people there, as well as Trump himself, who have prioritized, celebrating across the country America's 250th anniversary. So, I thought first, Charles, you should talk to us about what we should be celebrating if we celebrate the birthday of America. I mean, after all, we're celebrating something that has not just to do with the living and the dead, but the dead. It's a country that's been around for 250 years. Okay, but what exactly is the birthday for or of?
Well, of course, that's an important question, and it's a very American question as well, because America is first of all a founded nation. That is to say, we don't trace our origins back to time immemorial or to the distant, misty fogs of the 17th century or the 13th century or earlier even than that. But we are a people on experiment, as Tom Paine said. And we have a kind of beginning. When the experiment began, we've had to come to understand what it's about, what we're trying to accomplish in America as Americans, and that takes us therefore back to the origins. And there are not many countries anymore really are founded. They don't claim to come from some smaller group of originators or founders who lay the law down and who start the political clock for the country. Israel is another founded country which has a generation that began it. America is a much older, in some respects, in other respects, much younger than Israel, founded country. But there aren't that many of them. Great Britain is obviously not quite a founded country because it is precisely a country of many, many centuries and maybe even millennia. It goes back, it counts the common law and many other kind of gradually growing dimensions of itself as very important to what it is. But America is different. And so we had a beginning, we had a founding generation. Maybe indeed we had more than one founding generation. One of the first questions you have to ask yourself if you're getting into the founding business, so to speak, is what's the relation between the Puritan founding, the first bunch of Puritans and Pilgrims who come to the United States in the 17th century, and the 18th century founding, the famous founding of the Declaration of Independence and eventually the Constitution and a Republican government as such in the country. They aren't exactly the same, although they obviously have an important relation to each other, and we have both of them, not just one of them. So it's a more complicated question to understand our origins than it might seem. More complicated historically and also religiously and politically.
Yeah, and you would expect, I suppose, all of that in a way to be celebrated over the course of the next year, or would be appropriate to celebrate much of that. And when you look at the exact, the moment of conception, as it were, when you look at this 1776, I mean, we really are talking about the Declaration of Independence as a focal point. And that's something that, of course, the Claremont Institute has taught generations about over the course of the last 40 plus years. I mean, Talk a little bit about that. I mean, because you said we have a beginning. Certainly, the focus used to be anyway that you would start with it. The Declaration was that beginning, or at least the beginning of the beginning, officially, right? So,
Yeah.
so talk a little about that, because it does seem that we live in a time in which the teaching about the Declaration is the importance of it has not gone away. It's denigrated by right and left, and has been for some time. It's often misunderstood, and it seems to me that among the many parts of the founding or foundings, that's something that should be celebrated and proclaimed this year.
Yes, it's the time is ripe. Certainly, the anniversary is upon us. Now, one should bear in mind that we are not the first generation to worry about the longevity of America or of the Republican experiment more broadly. The founders themselves were great students of the history of Republican politics. That is to say, not just over here in the colonies, but also in Europe, and in particular in Rome, ancient Rome and ancient Greece, among other places, and in various Renaissance city-states that were republics in Italy. And they were aware that the history of Republican government is, in many respects, a long history of failure, that all the most famous republics collapse eventually. And they often collapse from republicanism. It's it's a virus that is easily caught but hard to get over, and so Americans from the very beginning are amazingly historical in their thinking about their own country. And of course, Rome is the most famous large republic in the history of mankind. And so Rome is a particular destination for a lot of these historical inquiries that the American founders like Madison and Hamilton and Washington, Jefferson, and the others, Franklin, that they were inquiring into. And one of the things about that's interesting about the semiquincentennial is, of course, we're talking in Latin and essentially speaking the spoken form of Latin numerals.
That's Latin, not Latinx. Not Latinx. That's Latin. Yeah.
Not Latinx. No, that's right. This is the y-axis, I think. I'm not sure, but anyway, yeah. So semiquincentennial means literally half of 500. So the 200, what sometimes is now called the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and of the beginning of America as a separate and equal country in the world. That is what we celebrate when we celebrate the 250th of the United States, the American people, and their system of government. But Jeff Anderson, who's a mutual friend of ours, for some reason, maybe just because of his optimism, he likes to translate semiquincentennial as quarter millennial, and it's true.
Very optimistic. Yeah.
250 is half of 500, and it's a quarter of the way to 1,000. So if you're thinking in really Roman terms, about 1,000 years of political existence and political influence, albeit under very different forms of government in the Roman case over that 1,000 years, then you would think, maybe in Roman scale of being a quarter of the way to 250 a quarter of the way to 1,000. But that's I think that's it's stretching it a little bit. We're doing well to be half the way to 500. I don't want to jinx us by claiming, in fact, we're a quarter of the way to 1,000. That sounds awfully proud to me.
Yeah, well, maybe the most American thing is just to worry about getting through the next 50 years without losing it, right? A republic, if you can
Well,
keep
yeah.
it, let's try to keep it another 50. That'd be great. I'd be happy with that for now. And when you think about why, why we say that, and perhaps why, and we'll get into the ways in which maybe the 250th should be celebrated next year. But the reason we would say that is because something like this, right, where it's under threat. I mean, the understanding of what Republican government is, and indeed the actual structure, the living structure, the effectual structure of the government right now, is bent out of shape, out of whack in some way, or at least as we could say, to make a cartoon of Charles Kesler book. There are two warring constitutions, right? And that battle is going on right now, and really, it's obfuscated by. I mean, the 250th is obfuscated by this fact that in order to be celebrated, you have to fight against, this opposing view of what the regime is and should be.
Yes, and you're almost forced to take sides in ongoing political disputes, which cut quite deep and have been going on really for more than 100 years in our own politics. America has always loved the Declaration of Independence and in various ways tried to unite behind it, and been remarkably successful at uniting behind it. But just as we have, resolved our disputes along the way, we have created new ones. And so the meaning of the Declaration of Independence is, I think, ascertainable. I mean, you can talk about what the integrity of the ideas and the origin of the ideas, the meaning of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence, and you can do so very intelligently and very well, and I hope we will do that as part of the 250th. But it's also the case that Americans have fought over the meaning of the Declaration of Independence and argued over the meaning of it for the entire 250 years of our national existence. There's hardly a decade that went by without some interesting controversy erupting having to do with the founding or the implications of the American founding, and in particular the Declaration. I've been working slowly on a book sort of on this question, on the Declaration of Independence and the American political tradition. And one of the things I've learned early on in my research was just how controversial the meaning of the Declaration was and how argued over it was. I'm talking even in the Jacksonian period, even well before slavery had come to dominate American politics later in the 19th century. Once that happened, once you're on the glide path to civil war, then you can understand why increasingly people want to argue about slavery through the Declaration of Independence, through an argument about the Declaration. But even before slavery was on the front burner of national politics, it's amazing how controversial the Declaration was for other reasons, not directly linked to the slavery question.
So go into that a little bit. Yeah, what were those debates?
Well, they all have to do, I guess you could say, with the question of what kind of a democracy is America, or what does it mean to be a democracy? Because there were some founders and let's say in the generation right after the founding, who thought that we had in the Constitution basically come to the natural end of the evolution of democratic government. This is what democracy is, constitutionalism of the American sort, and we've got it, we have it, we're enjoying it, we're experimenting with it, we're trying to live up to it, and so forth. But this is sort of, we don't need to have any major further evolution in our understanding of what democracy is and what it requires of us. But at that same time that many Americans took that position, even more Americans took the other position, which is we're at the beginning of democracy. This is probably not all the democracy that we will need or that we will want. And so we were already looking forward to the evolution of democracy, to its transformation into something slightly different, maybe something more, more demanding, maybe something more featuring more solidarity, more sort of political passion or political commitment. There are a lot of Jacksonians, of course, who take that point of view. That the democracy we need is ought to be more democratic. We ought to have, for example, no property requirements for voting or holding office. It should be a real democracy. That is, you can be poor and be a citizen, and not just a citizen, but be a statesman, being an office holder as well. And that's kind of redefinition of democracy and expansion of democracy ought to be encouraged. And that's of course part of the early drama of American politics is the debate over all of the different ways in which men of the early 19th century thought about expanding democracy and making it something more, you might say more social, mm-hmm. or even socialist. Some of their thoughts were heading certainly in that kind of direction.
We've always had this robust debate over what this document means, which is really our founding document, or the document, moment of conception in a way, 1776. We go back to the Declaration, and all men are created equal. We argue about what human nature is, what men are, and we argue what does that mean, and we argue about what equality is. So obviously that leads to or plays a role in the Civil War, in the sense that the argument revolves right. around that. I feel like that is, and then we get into the last century, and we're sitting here now thinking about the 250th. How do you break down that debate now? What does that look like now? What does the argument over the Declaration look like now? Because that debate is perhaps happening without anyone mentioning the Declaration, unfortunately. But it does come up. It does come up explicitly, and you talk about it. But when you think about the kind of fight that would emerge, over the 250th, because what's going to happen, right, is inevitably the left is going to criticize whatever the Trump administration does, and they're going to say, well, actually, this isn't right. But how do you perceive that battle now between right and left over the Declaration?
That's a very good question, and there's certainly multiple dimensions that you could think about in answering a question like that. One of the most obvious would be the battle over the actual history, the teaching of American history, and especially the question of slavery, the question of race, all of those questions which got folded into the New York Times's so-called 1619 project. The point of that date being to try to replace 1776 in the popular history of the country, and to think of this not as a country of land of the free and home of the brave, but rather as the home of unfreedom, the home of slavery, beginning in 1619 when the first shipload of slaves arrived in Virginia to be sold, and that in a way, what the New York Times wanted to do in the 1619 project was to reset American history to begin earlier with the arrival of slavery, not freedom, or European style freedom, at least in the Americas. And that's it's been extremely. I mean, I think there are at least two things that are interesting about this project. One is how unsuccessful it has been at gathering support from the most illustrious liberal historians of the country. This is a very liberal or radical political reading of American history, the 1619 Project. None of whom endorsed the 1619 Project. Most of whom at least, criticized the 1619 Project in writing, in interviews, and in newspapers and other formats, and attracted a lot of attention to themselves, and showed in a way that civic education was not impossible in America. That is, that the left and the right could agree on some very important and fundamental things, such as that 1619 is not really the symbolic, much less the actual historical beginning of the United States of America, or of the ideas of the United States of America. And on that, there's really little controversy between Bernard Bailyn and Gordon Wood, and I could name a lot of other historians. I can look around my unkept office and find many books by them and mention their names. But with all of the controversy we have over race in America and over the Trump administration, politics in general, I find it surprising how easy it can be actually to get a pretty near consensus among good historians about what the fundamentals of the American story actually are. So I think that's one very interesting thing. But of course, the other thing is that the 1619 Project, even though it hasn't been, I think, nearly as successful as the New York Times had hoped, still has, assumed a kind of curricular afterlife, which is amazing. It has been, despite its critical failing, it has been something like a commercial success, I think. And the educational materials of the 1619 Project you can find in your child's high school, and maybe even in his or her grade school. They're all over the place. They've been bought widely by poor, misled superintendents of schools and school board members in districts all over the country, I'm afraid.
I mean, it is striking the opposition there. I mean, you are either centering, civic education around the principle of equality or political equality in some central way, or you're centering it around slavery, and saying, no, actually, the foundation and at the heart of this is slavery and oppression, or at the heart of this is this principle of political equality. But nonetheless, political equality is certainly something that is taken up by the left and proclaimed loudly, and we're ostensibly going to celebrate something about this, over the course of the next year. So that will be very interesting to see how it plays out, and what sort of celebration this is, which certainly everyone wants to be a part of. On the right, everyone wants to influence for good reason. So let's talk about just the importance of that celebration. I think one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I think that it's very easy for the intellectually minded and regular people alike these days to sort of discount pomp and circumstance and tradition and ritual, right? And the kind of celebrations that we're talking about. Americans like to laugh at themselves for commercializing holidays. It's a good American pastime. It's what we do. But it's the same as awards. Giving honors officially. These things have been eaten away from the inside, both because so many institutions are corrupt, or not trusted. And because I think something about our education and culture nowadays sort of discounts them. But it strikes me that this is a really important thing to celebrate, and that somehow Trump has really latched onto this and understands that. And I don't know, I look to you to tell us why.
Yes, no. Well, the Garden of Heroes. I mean, he has all of these ideas for patriotic commemoration, and I wanted to remind your audience that one of the first major speeches that President Trump gave in his first term of office, in a joint session to Congress, his first address to a joint session of Congress, happened to spend a lot of its time talking about the coming 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. This was very early in his first term. He didn't have to talk about the Declaration of Independence or the coming anniversary because it was not, at the top of anyone's to-do list. But in a rather far-seeing speech, which is not the usual kind of political give and take, but one could say this is one of his more statesman-like speeches, I think. He really talked about the meaning of the 250th anniversary, the meaning of the Declaration of Independence for America and for the people whom we call Americans. And it was a good speech. It was a serious speech. I mean, it was a speech that, of course, got little attention at the time and less still since, I'm afraid to say. But
it was that good. It was that good.
It was that good. Yes, we could well go back to that speech actually, and make something out of it. Give some addresses about that speech, or some op-eds on that speech should be written. Because he's always had a good sort of patriotic, good eye and ear for patriotic themes and occasions. And even when he doesn't need to, for any sort of overt political purpose, appeal to these kinds of patriotic occasions and causes, he does. That is, he realizes that it's an important part of his job to speak to Americans about America, and without any, I don't think there's an ounce of cynicism in that. I think he's quite sincere in thinking that one of his most important jobs as president is to defend the country, explain the country to its own citizens, and to take back the country, as he understands it, from the elite, from the political aristocrats and oligarchs who, over the past 100 years or less, have absorbed almost every ounce of political power in the system, and have turned what was once a much more democratic political order into a much less democratic political order.
Now, why is that, right? I mean, here you have, it's so true. I mean, you see it. I don't think it's disputable that when you see him, there's not an ounce of cynicism. He immediately understands, like a garden of heroes. We're going to have big statues, heroes all over. He's constantly explaining America. He comes up with these ideas, or he latches onto these ideas to celebrate America. He from the get-go was talking about the 250th, and he's clearly very excited about it. And there's important people in the administration who are pushing this forward. This is a real initiative. It's not just sort of a song and dance. But why is he, Donald J. Trump, right, able to just sort of without thinking say and do those things and see that as part of his role, as opposed to let's say Barack Hussein Obama, as Trump likes to call him, likes to use that middle name. But what's the difference between the two?
That's a good question, and it's a long question, I think, because the short answer is education. I mean, the education that Obama had turns out to be really quite different from the education that Donald J. Trump had. I mean, both went to Ivy League institutions eventually. Trump was at UPenn, and the ex-president, of course, was at Columbia, and eventually at Harvard Law School as well. And there's something about the elite culture, which each president had, of course, an exposure to elite culture in America. If you define that sufficiently elastically to include two very different slices of elite culture, Donald Trump, I've written on this question. Donald Trump does, here's a word that is very important to Donald Trump, and he uses it frequently: deals. Not every Ivy League, businessman or much less politician or lawyer thinks about the world in terms of deals. What is a deal? What's the difference between a deal and a mergers and acquisition, or any of the more sort of elaborate, structured public offerings of companies, or venture capital rounds, or any of the things you could read about in the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times happening in America or in Europe, for that matter, or in Asia? All around the world they happen these days. But the people who are at Davos, who go to Davos in order to feel important about themselves and the world, they don't do deals. They do agreements and arrangements and world improving,
much fancier things,
philanthropic exercises of one kind or another. They're not in this for themselves. Oh no, this has nothing to do with self-interest. This has nothing to do with getting ahead in the world, or making your mark on the world. This is all a kind of odd, selfless philanthropic project. Well, Donald Trump does not think like that. He thinks about deals. He can get you a great deal. He's got to get himself a great deal. He has no block to thinking about self-interest, about what's in it for him, what's in it for you, what should be in it for you and him, and how you're going to get together, to come to an agreement in which each of your self-interests is to some degree satisfied without necessarily getting everything.
Some people,
one of you want.
Some people would say, okay, well, the downside of that is, well, he's no block. Well, he's without shame. But the other side of that is that he's just simply honest, right? The positive side of that, he's being honest. He's not using these ridiculous subterfuges to pretend to himself and other people that he's not actually at the end of the day making a deal.
Yes, no, that's all. That's very true and very important. I think he doesn't. If I could be a professor for a second, Trump is kind of the. I was thinking about this the other day. Trump is kind of the antithesis of the, categorical ethics of Immanuel Kant. High German ethics in which any reference to self-interest or even happiness is anti-ethical. It's defined as the opposite of thinking ethically, which, when you're thinking ethically, you can think only about universal laws and willing universal laws and acting for the sake of sort of universal consistency and goodness, and it has nothing to do with getting ahead in the world. It has nothing to do with even happiness or improving the quality of life in sort of material or objective ways, and for 200 years. The hottest thing in ethics has been this kind of thinking, which begins by putting aside all self-interest, all thought of your own happiness or of anybody else's happiness, and looking to universalize moral duties. Doing the right thing for the right reason, which is the only ethically pure and satisfactory reason to do anything.
And this is would you say that this is what you're describing as sort of the skeleton behind a lot of the ridiculous morality, the preening, the virtue signaling we see, as you said,
yes.
among that elite?
Well,
I do this completely for everybody else, and you must sacrifice yourself to this universal abstract thing.
Yes, it's like United Nations thinking.
Mm-hmm.
If it were possible to take the United Nations seriously, it would have been taken seriously already by professors, and they've tried to take it seriously for more than 75 years now, and they still haven't succeeded.
And Trump doesn't take it seriously.
Ridiculous about it. But the way to think that everyone has a country, and thus some national interest, and you're partial to your own. That's the beginning point of common sense in politics. It is absolutely outside of thinking like a United Nations person. Mm-hmm. You have no country. You have no interest. You are here for the sake of the world. You're here for the sake of peoples everywhere. And you are here to empower them, to give them the kind of expertise and the kind of selfless morality which they themselves are much too engulfed in capitalist acts to be capable of.
Right.
And so and the whole from a certain point of view, Trump is the anti-UN.
Mm-hmm.
He's the opposite of pure morality in the sort of highfalutin sense of German idealism, and he is a much more American figure, or a much more democratic figure, if I may say so, with small d, of course. He doesn't expect people to be purely moral. He doesn't expect them to do good for no reason, that touches their own well-being or their families or their country's well-being. He lives in many ways in a very different world from the ruling class, in international politics, or even in, increasingly at the national level in country after country, which they all sort of think now in a kind of UN approved way, or they try to. And Trump is not like that, and he's not guilty because he doesn't think like everyone else does. And so what he says, which to many people comes across as sort of common sense, or just, this is the way the world is. I mean, take it or leave it, but you're not going to change it. That is the way most people think about him, and I think the way he thinks about himself, but it's not the way that the elite thinks about him, or, of course, that he thinks about the elites. I mean, he thinks the elites are, to use another favorite word in his vocabulary, idiots.
That is all the time we have for today, but this was an excellent conversation. I thank you for it. And let us hope that some great things, maybe some great projects, can at least be started this next year in celebration of America's birthday. Thank you, Charles.
Terrific. Great to see you. Happy 4th of July. It's too late for that now, but it'll come around next year, we hope.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll see you at the Lincoln Fellowship, the Claremont Institute
All right,
event.
great.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, we'll get to some of the best highlights of the interview with Matt, but real quick, I've got to tell you about the cover-up on Blaze TV. If you haven't watched it yet, you're actually missing something pretty big. It's the docuseries that lays out how the government and public health agencies lied to you during COVID. I know you know it, but there's tons still to learn. You get to see the origins of the virus, all the lockdowns and the vaccine narrative, and how big tech helped cover everything up. It wasn't about public health. It was about information warfare. And all 5 episodes are out right now. The 5th episode drops today. It is called Muckraker and exposes how Fauci, Birx, and other bureaucrats work with social media giants to shut down the truth. It's not just censorship. It's manipulation at the highest level. So you can go to FauciCoverup.com/mandate and see all 5 episodes and get $20 off your subscription. Again, it's FauciCoverup.com/mandate. Now, Charles Kesler, very impressive interview there. You can tell that he is a very smart man. I loved going through the 1619 Project. Like they're trying to make that a thing still. He was like, absolutely not. America 250. There's still so much to get into there, and the build up for the year that we will be seeing. And then he was just going through the story of trying to tell the American people the history of what's happened in this country. It seems so simple, yet we don't always do it.
No, we don't do it, and. As he said, the history of America, though, is a history that in a way has always been arguing about our founding, because we've always been arguing about the Declaration of Independence and what it means. So what's interesting is both sides in America try to claim the Declaration of Independence rather than denigrate it as theirs for most of American history. But there's also times when people just outright reject it. And 1619 is really trying to say, no, the heart of America, as Charles points out, is in fact slavery and oppression, whereas even the old libs, which he makes this point, like a lot of the old liberal historians who probably voted old school Democrat back in the day, but they were just good historians, they knew that just wasn't true, that actually this principle of political equality was there and wrangled over and fought over throughout American history. So what do you have today? Well, you have the opportunity to actually celebrate that and bring that back. And if you don't understand these things, right, if we don't have some agreement on these things, we can't be citizens of the same country. We can't really have a country if we don't understand and celebrate what makes us uniquely American.
You will have the opportunity to celebrate with all the Claremont people next week from California, but you're still going to be on the show.
Yeah, we're going to be interviewing a number of people, some of them professors, some of them people who are in the fellowships. It's always a good time. It's always an incredible group of people. So we're going to do that. I'm going to try to make it fun, and we will be having fun for a good 5 days there. So I can't wait to bring that to you all. Jill sits here in the chair.
Listen, it's 100 degrees in Texas today. It's not going to be 100 degrees next week, though, so Matt's not going to be the only one enjoying the outdoor weather. It'll cool off in Texas. But everybody, thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.